Hello folks, I'm Lovro Šprem and welcome to the video on how to evaluate extensions. More specifically on how do we rank material based on importance and contribution to the debate. We're going to start with some general tips and on what closing teams are allowed and forbidden to do in a debate. So closing teams can of course extend the debate, rebut or characterize. On the other hand, they should not definition challenge or introduce brand new policies or contradict their opening. And we will go into more detail as follows, but two important things to emphasize when evaluating in general. The first is on flagging extensions. So flagging extension material can be useful. However, it is not a prerequisite for the extension to be credited by judges in any way. And judges have an opportunity and an obligation even to compare material from closing, even if it is not flagged as an extension. The second tip is on adjudicating comparisons. And this should be no different because it includes a closing team. So when comparing extensions to opening material, we do not place a higher burden of proof on extensions. In other words, thinking that because closing has had more time to prepare, their contributions must be held to a higher standard than opening material. Instead, we evaluate the relative contributions of all teams to the round. Now let's take a look at all things that are considered extensions. And we're going to start with rebuttal. So engaging with the other side definitely brings contribution to the debate. This can include responding to the damaging implications that were analyzed by the opposing teams and mitigating or flipping them, but also refuting challenges to mechanistic links or characterization brought by other teams. For example, in a debate about foreign interventions, a valid contribution is to respond to claims that an intervention would bring a lot of instability in the post-intervention period for a specific country or area. More on engaging rebuttal can be found in the Evaluating Rebuttal video by Harish from Model 2. The second thing that can constitute an extension is context. And context as well can be a powerful contribution to the debate from closing side. Identifying the current political situation in a more detailed and persuasive way can increase the likelihood of something happening or not happening, which is important to how persuasive you are going to be. For example, this can be the difference between saying something occurs because it happens in a political system with two representative houses and analyzing the current situation between the two representative houses and why this leads to the outcome that you are claiming. The third thing is moral intuitions or an emotive response. And identifying widely shared moral intuitions in favor of an argument or emotion is a contribution to the debate and can mean the team will win over its opening. This is also a part of a broader contribution, which includes running a principle or a practical aspect that was forgotten by the opening team. For example, this can mean explaining why a specific group or an actor would in fact care about the argument brought in opening if it is an actor motion, or why in general a motion should pass or fail, depending on this aspect of the clash. More on engaging with principle and practical arguments can be found under Miloš's workshop from Model 2. The next part will explain what happens when teams run a vertical or an analytical extension as a special case. The important part is that we judge only and exclusively by a contribution that teams make towards their side of the house. This automatically excludes judging on metrics such as the number of mechanisms developed, the length spent on specific parts of the case, the speed of delivery or vocabulary used, etc. A good sign of a mechanistic link that happens from closing, which is a contribution to the debate, is if it is logically prior to the case in opening, filling a missing link in the case, or a direct and more robust way of showing that an effect will manifest under the case from opening, or that it is important it manifests. So in a situation where closing adds mechanisms that try to prove opening's impacts, we would look to see what extent the closing mechanisms achieve probability of impacts happening compared to opening ones, and whether the added links increase the likely impact from opening. The same approach would be used in a different setting, where closing adds new impacts to the case of opening. We would in the same way explore whether closing impacts manifest without the mechanisms brought in opening, or are they contingent on the case in opening, in which case the contribution is larger for a team that provides more likelihood of an impact happening. An example of a contribution not large enough would be if the team in closing says that opening's case works better in countries ridden with corruption, where impacts are larger and therefore they should take over their opening. This does not count as a substantive analytical extension, as the reasons behind the impact still depend on the analysis provided by the opening. Closing has only added the new context without analyzing how the new context changes existing arguments. More can be found under Hadar's workshop from Module 3. The next thing I want to cover is new framing. And new framing can be a contribution to the debate as well. Here, judges should look to see whether the framing added by closing works only in a cherry-picked set of circumstances that closing talks about, which would be an unfair narrowing of the debate. For example, only in high-income or low-income countries, or in landlocked countries, or in the Mediterranean Sea-type climate. However, explaining what are the most relevant groups, stakeholders, events, or processes that occur in the motion is a big contribution. It has the potential to increase the impacts of the debate, or make the mechanisms more robust and ensure the mechanisms indeed happen. For example, explaining the influence and impact of added budget deficit or debt is a valid and potentially winning contribution in a debate about government's economic policy that was framed as an inequality issue in the opening. Lastly, a couple of words on what is not an extension and should not be credited as a contribution. So, adding new layers of policy that was reasonably explained in the opening is not allowed, even if it is a better explained policy, unless this is crucial for understanding the debate in and of itself. For example, in a debate about banning cigarettes, if opening says there will be fines for people who violate the policy, closing can reasonably add that these fines would depend on the number of offenses, as is usually the case. However, they can't warrant that a large education campaign would be implemented as well, because this is not beyond reasonable doubt for the specific type of policy. Similarly, if opening defines an intervention debate as boots on the ground, closing can't run away from the burden of defending the policy by claiming that their policy is airstrikes instead of boots on the ground, which leads to fewer deaths. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed the video.